I've just disembarked a cruise where I stayed in a cabin that is almost entirely underwater. It was described by the cruise line as elegant and nostalgic, and I stayed here for a week with my dad. I'm not sure they're the words I would necessarily use, but we certainly did see some interesting sights from down here, including these padded walls and lots of water. Cruises on board this ship usually start at around $500 per person per night, so my expectations were high going into this, much higher than usual. I hoped that I wouldn't feel claustrophobic given that there was only one way into and out of the cabin. For years I've wanted to take a luxury river cruise, but I've never found a trip within my budget. That was until I found a cruise on sale on the SS La Venezia, sailing from Venice. It did make me wonder why this cruise had been reduced so much, but I decided to book the cheapest cabin on the ship to find out for myself. The cheapest and smallest cabin on the cruise was called Classic, and that sounded good to me. There was a note about the window being situated on the waterline, but I did not read into that too much at the time. I was just very excited to be able to get on board. I hoped that I wouldn't find it strange if we had water splashing over the windows, but in reality the problems we had weren't really the ones that we thought about before. The majority of cabins on this ship are either called deluxe cabins with big windows, or they are balconies or suites. I found the cabin on the deck plan all the way down on deck 1, cabin 107. There were only 7 cabins like this on the entire ship. The rest of the cabins on this deck are for the crew. The plan of the cabin did make it look like the beds separated, which I was very happy to see, but it didn't look as though there would be very much space there, which was a bit worrying. I spent a lot of time looking at video tours and pictures trying to work out the bed situation, but there really isn't much about this ship on the internet. I assumed that they would have told us if the beds couldn't separate, or I wouldn't have booked this cabin for me and my dad. We boarded the cruise around 10 AM, which is very early, but our cabins weren't ready until 3 PM. We had full access to the rest of the ship during this time, and we could enjoy the included drinks and make the most out of the food. When we were walking to the restaurant for lunch, we walked down the corridor that had the suites on it. I of course had to have a look inside. I think it is impossible to resist. It is always so exciting to look around cabins, and perhaps even more so when they're not yours. The suites here might look quite patterned, but when you see my cabin, you'll see that these are actually pretty toned down in comparison, if you can believe it. All of the suites on board are unique in their design, and the big balcony there did look lovely. Some of these bigger suites hold 3 people, and the rest of the cabins hold 2. I knew that our cabin wouldn't have any fresh air or any outside space, but after spending some time on the top deck, I just decided that this would be my big balcony. There was not a shortage of space up here, and these sofa seats were very comfortable. I was so excited when our cabin was ready. Me and my dad went down the stairs all the way to deck 1, past the tea and coffee machine with the cookies and the laundry. The corridor felt very bright and modern. It definitely did feel like we were down in the middle of a ship, but not necessarily in a bad way. It was patterned, but it wasn't too much. I was not prepared for the cabin though. I'm not sure that I really have the words to describe this room. For the first time ever, I am genuinely lost for words. The first thing I noticed when I went into the room was how the pattern was all over the walls, it was all over the floor, it was on the ceiling, it was on the door to the bathroom, the cupboards, even the stool and the chair. There was a tiny little bit of white around the bathroom door, which you can see here, but I'm sure that if they could have, they would have also put the pattern there. They certainly got their money's worth out of this pattern, and I'm glad that they didn't put it on the bed because I think that would have been too much. This ship was actually completely refurbished in 2020. This is the new design, and I've got to be honest, the more research I did into the old design, the more I realised that I actually preferred that. Before the refit, it was just light and stripy. Some things like the bed, they've remained exactly the same, but they just basically added this pattern everywhere. My friend Gary went on board pre-refit. Let me know which design you prefer. I'm not sure if it's related at all, but the year before the refit, the ocean cruise ship MSC Opera crashed into this river ship. It caused a lot of damage, and Uniworld sued MSC for 13 million euros. Oops. I honestly hope that this pattern wouldn't give me a migraine. I have suffered with migraines in the past, and they usually sort of mess up my eyesight before I get the headache part. I thought if that happened in this cabin, if I was laying in bed and I was looking up at the ceiling, I might not even know if my eyes were going weird, especially since the lights did flicker, but I was really hoping that they wouldn't always do that. Speaking to other guests though on this cruise, it seems to be not just my cabin, it's just generally a flickery ship. I did like the room though, it felt fairly spacious for a river cruise cabin, and I loved having these windows. They were right on the waterline, and the water would come up if a boat went by on the other side. I did wonder what this would be like when we were sailing, and I would find that out the next day. On the bed was our cruise overview, which was very, very helpful, and a fluffy luggage mat. Our luggage was here when we arrived, which does make sense. It didn't have very far to come, unlike on the big ocean ships where sometimes it can be going up 18 decks. On this cruise, our luggage just came in, went down one level, and it was there. Easy peasy. It didn't take me very long to realise that although the beds were set up as twins, they couldn't move even 1 centimetre apart. The desk on my side and the bedside table on the other side were very heavy and they were fixed. Usually I would just sort of push one over a bit and move my bed if I had to, but I knew that that wouldn't be possible here. If I hadn't paid much for the cruise, I probably would have thought that that was fine, but I did think this was disappointing for a luxury line. There are plenty of friends and family who cruise together, and you've got to get on to sleep this close. Luckily, I do get on with my dad, and I ended up sleeping upside down for the cruise, and I did kick my dad in the head at one point while I was asleep. By accident, of course. Even when I've cruised with the more budget river cruise lines, budget ocean cruise lines in the past, we've always been able to move the beds apart. I love the mirror on the desk, and here there was a drawer for all of our bits and bobs. I did bring some chocolate with me for the journey, and it was so hot on this cruise that this is how my chocolate ended up. It still tasted good though, it was lovely. There was a little jar on the desk, and here we would find some chocolates. Everything in this cabin felt very solid and heavy. I'm sure it was all of very good quality, and the attention to detail was impressive. On all of the pattern panels there would be these little circle bits. I guess I would call them studs maybe, but let me know what you call them. The door handles felt very ornate, and I think ornate is a good word for this cabin. Perhaps the most important feature of this cabin was the air conditioning, and I'm so happy to report that it worked perfectly. Coming back into our room from being outside was like a breath of fresh air. Literally. We unpacked our bags, and there was plenty of storage for 2 of us for a week. There was a good mix of hanging space and drawers, as well as a safe. Every cabin on board has its own bathroom, and I loved the design of ours. It felt a lot calmer than the rest of the cabin, and there was a good amount of storage in here too. The shower itself was pretty big, although I could sit on the toilet and wash my feet in the shower if I wanted to. That is pretty standard for a river cruise cabin though, and this bathroom could be on pretty much any river cruise ship without any issue. We didn't set sail this first night, so we wouldn't get to experience what it was like to sail. What I did get to experience though was how this cabin was in the dark. The blinds here do have the same pattern on them too, of course they do. Because I was sleeping upside down, I would fall asleep looking into this mirror. I'm not gonna lie, I do think this is more creepy than relaxing, but when my eyes were closed, I slept very well, and I didn't have any weird dreams, amazingly. The beds were very comfortable, and whatever makes bedding good quality, this cabin had it. The branding was lovely, and even the towels in the bathroom had the UniWorld logo. The cabin always felt very quiet, and we both slept very well. One of my favourite things to do in the cabin was to watch the TV. I usually don't watch the TV when I cruise, but this TV had a channel that was interesting to me, and that was the lounge cam. That meant that we could see what was happening in the main lounge without ever leaving our room. That was particularly helpful on 70s night, where I put on these trousers, just because I felt like the cabin, maybe it needed some more patterns in it. I am absolutely kidding. With this cam though, I could see if people were already up and if they were dancing on the dance floor. One problem that a lot of cabins have is that they don't have enough plug sockets, but that was not a problem on this ship at all. We had far more than we needed in reality. Most of the sockets were over near what are called the Vox boxes. These were little devices we used when we went out on excursions, and this is how we could always hear the guide. UniWorld do include excursions, so that was a really nice treat. Most of the places we went to on this cruise, we stayed there for a couple of days. That meant that we didn't really sail very much, but that did work for us. When we were sailing away from a port, we would usually go up on the top deck, we would enjoy a cocktail. If we were down in the cabin, we would see the water splashing over the windows. This didn't bother me at all, but I do understand how this could scare some people. The thing that got me was that the cabin would go so dark when the water splashed over the window. Most of the cruise we didn't have those main lights on just because of the flickering and the pattern. I thought it was great fun though. Even when we weren't sailing, you could hear the water as the other ships went by us, and I found it quite relaxing. The water noise might make some people need the toilet though, and I could definitely see somebody accidentally going into the wardrobe because the bathroom door is camouflaged. It looks exactly the same as the walls. There were lots of little touches in this cabin where you could tell that Uniworld had paid attention to detail. The bed frame, for example, or the do not disturb beanbag. You did hear me right there, do not disturb beanbag. Most cruises either have a button that you press and it lights up outside the room, or they might have a magnet that you stick onto the door. Here though, we had a beanbag, and I think that summed up this cruise perfectly. The beanbag worked very well. I'm not sure that I really get it, but I can see what they're doing, and it was very luxurious. If we were on Do Not Disturb and they wanted to leave us the daily schedule for the next day, they would put it in a lovely little bag like this and leave it on the door handle. Sometimes they would leave us small treats too, but we mostly just ate these cookies. These cookies were always available and they were so good. In a few ways, I felt like this cabin was style over substance. The blinds, for example, they do look very nice in that weird shape, but it meant that we couldn't ever really completely block out the lights. Again, not a problem for me. I can sleep through almost anything, but I know some people really don't like that. And when a cruise costs as much as this one did, I think it's fair enough to be a bit more fussy. Our cabin was cleaned every day and it was always spotlessly clean. I think this is a prime example of something being good, but not necessarily to my personal taste. The walls, for example, are padded. I'm sure that it does help with dampening down sounds, but it was really weird. Probably it's harder to clean too if you accidentally spill something. Like imagine spilling a cup of tea onto a padded wall. We could occasionally hear guests in the other cabin if they sneezed or if they flushed the toilet, but overall it was pretty quiet and peaceful. Nobody walked by our room unless they were staying in a cabin down here. We didn't really miss having any outside space, and although it would have been nice, I don't think it would have been worth the upgrade, especially since it was so hot on this cruise that you'd have to keep the door closed anyway if you wanted to keep the temperature in the room down. The beds still don't split properly in the balcony cabins and they still have the same pattern. It's a bold choice, but plenty of people love it. I paid £1,998, which is around $2,600 for this cruise for the week. That is based on 2 people sharing this cabin, and my dad also paid that price. That was me booking in the Christmas half price sale, but the normal price for this room is closer to £500 or £600 per person per night. For the balcony upgrade, it was around 50% extra, so let me know if you would pay for that upgrade. Do keep in mind that we were docked pretty much all the time and we only sailed for a few hours a week. To find out what we got up to on the rest of the cruise and whether I felt that it was worth the price tag, check out this video next. We saw some very interesting things. You're not going to want to miss this, so I'll see you in a few seconds.